Welcome to the final part of our webinar, Note-Taking and Organizational Workflow Strategies, brought to you by the Graduate Writing Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. I'm Kelly, a Graduate Writing Center Fellow, and I will be taking us through this webinar. In this final part, we'll talk about workflow and productivity strategies. We'll share ways to find your flow when writing and some strategies for managing your productivity. Let's begin by asking ourselves these questions. At what time of day do you focus best? In what environments do you focus best? And what are your goals for that particular work time? So it's important to get to know your working habits to best facilitate flow and productivity. On the topic of finding your flow, I'll begin by sharing what are some different ways that our fellows stay productive. A number of fellows shared that they use the Pomodoro method. The Pomodoro method is a way to stay focused and mentally fresh when you're working, so you could use this specifically when you're writing. You start by choosing a task, and then you set a timer traditionally for 25 minutes. You work for those 25 minutes, then the timer goes off, and you take a 5-minute break. You repeat this cycle, this Pomodoro cycle, 4 times, and then after the 4th time, you take a longer 15 to 30-minute break. Then the cycle starts over again. You can change the timings for this. So for me, for example, I like 50 and 10, so 50 minutes of work and then a 10-minute break because I find 25 minutes disrupts my flow a little bit. There are a lot of online tools like Pomodoro timers that you can use. You can use YouTube videos or there's some different websites that you can find the Pomodoro timer. Another thing that helps us is writing our thoughts down before we get started on a particular task. So sometimes it's easy to get distracted from a task when you have a lot of other things that you could be focusing on. So you can try writing down all of the things that you need to focus on later, set it to the side, and then you can come back to it later, but you can focus on that particular task without being distracted by other tasks. You can also try budgeting time throughout the day, even if it's just a small amount of time, like 30 minutes. Many of us like to do our writing or try to plan a whole day of writing or a whole couple of hours of writing, but sometimes you can't find the time to do that. So instead, try to make a habit of budgeting small portions of time throughout the day or throughout the week to get some writing done, instead of waiting for you to have an entire day just to do writing. Sometimes small bursts of activity or bursts of productivity can make a big difference in the progress that you make on your writing assignments. You can also try some study with me in ambiance YouTube videos. I'll share an example of this in a couple of slides. But these are ways to create an environment that might be soothing or productive for you to write. So you can look these up on YouTube. And also, it's important to know when your mind works best. So for some of us, we are much more productive in the morning, and that's when we can do a lot of our best writing and thinking. Others of us work better in the afternoon, or some of us are night owls. So once you know that, add that time to your schedule, block off that time, and make that your work time. And be strict about sticking to that schedule. And some little things that you can do to eliminate time-wasting temptations. Maybe it's as simple as moving your phone into the other room while you're writing, or closing some tabs, or moving to an environment where there are fewer distractions. Small things like that could make a big difference in you finding your flow. And try setting clear, specific goals when you sit down to work. You could write it on a sticky note or just think through it before you get started. One way to do this is to try SMART goals. So SMART goals allow you to break down a large goal, such as completing a pilot study, into small, manageable chunks. It allows you to maintain accountability to your bigger goal and measure the progress that you're making towards that goal, but it doesn't feel as overwhelming. So a SMART goal should be specific, it should be measurable. So for example, give yourself some numbers. Maybe it's reading 1 or 2 papers or writing a certain number of words. It should be achievable, so something that you can actually get done within the time that you allotted for yourself. It should be relevant to your bigger project and time-bound. You could also try reverse planning to manage your productivity. Reverse planning involves planning for a project by starting with the submission date or the ideal completion date, and then backtrack each step that needs to be completed for the project. So you put the completion date in your calendar, break down the project into smaller tasks, and figure out when you want to complete each task. So you plan backwards from the deadline. Some people use variations of what are called Kanban boards. So Kanban boards allow you to manage work at both a personal and an organizational level. So you might see these used in the workplace as well. They depict work at various stages of a process using a card to represent certain work items and columns to represent different stages of the process. So work items can be visualized, and then you can get a view of your progress or in the process from start to finish. So for example, here, these are examples of a Kanban board for a research project or a article publication. It begins with the idea, into the IRB and data collection stages, data analysis, writing, submission, and then through the review and publication process. You can try this with your own projects if you can break it down into tasks. There's also a number of online tools that allow you to do this. Another productivity strategy you could try is using a timeline, and this could be useful for larger projects that last over the course of many months or even many years. This example here is my dissertation timeline. I use Notion to keep track of my progress on my dissertation. So you'll see that I've input for each month the part of the process that I want to be at. So in this particular picture, the screenshot, I'm in the data collection and data transcription part of the process. I haven't quite gone to the data analysis, and then starting in January 2023, I'd like to be writing my first analysis chapter. So this is a great way to visualize bigger projects and try to stay on track that way. As another example of how I use Notion for different academic-related projects and goals, I also keep track of conferences and grants and those submissions on Notion. So I have 3 sections here. As you'll see, I have a section called To Apply. So these are applications that I'm either working on or would like to start working on, and I have their due dates there. And then I'll have a section titled Applied, Awaiting Results. and then a section titled Applied Proposal Accepted with presentations upcoming or grants awarded. So I can move these pieces or move these different squares into the sections as they make progress. So it's kind of like a Kanban board, just a way to keep track of different projects and where they are in progress. And finally, you can use checklists. So this is an example of some of my academic checklists where I just keep track of things that I need to get done and when I need to get them done and for what project, whether it's my dissertation, conferences, grants, things like that. You can also try using some apps to help you with productivity, especially if you have trouble staying focused. Some of us use Forest, which is an app where you can set a time that you want to be productive. So maybe you want to work for, in this example, 105 minutes. And you start that timer, and as throughout those 105 minutes, a tree grows. And if you open your phone or you leave the app, you end up killing the tree. But if you don't, and if you don't touch your phone during that period of time, after 105 minutes, the tree will grow, and then you can make yourself, you end up with a forest. So if you want to gamify productivity, you could try something like that. There are also other apps. Just one example is Self-Control for your Mac or for your iPhone. And like I mentioned earlier, you might focus better with a particular ambiance. So you can try Study With Me videos on YouTube, for example. You can just search Study With Me and a lot of them come up. In this example I have, you could study in the Hogwarts library where there's some background noise, and it's actually a Pomodoro style session. So you would work for 25 minutes and then there's a 5-minute break that pops up. So you could try that as well. I'll conclude by sharing a couple more tips that come from a book written by Paul Sylvia called How to Write a Lot. And in this book, he shares a number of different tips for being productive, and particularly being productive with your academic writing or research writing. He says that you'll never find enough time to write, you just have to allot time. So you really need to add time to your schedule. Maybe you can even block it out in your calendar as your writing time or your working time. He argues that regularity is more helpful than time or frequency. He says the only way to write a lot is to write regularly, regardless of whether you feel like writing. So that again goes to this idea of making writing a part of your habit, allotting time. If you can allot a little bit of time every day, that might be better than having a full day, like a full Sunday, to do your writing. Instead, make it part of your daily habit. And he also says, do whatever you need to do during writing time that supports your writing. So maybe during your writing time, it might be reading or taking notes, but that's all part of the writing process. And as his example of what he does, he says he writes for 2 hours a day for the first 2 hours of work. So maybe if you're an early bird, something like this might work for you. Or maybe you can find another time of your day to allot to your writing. To conclude, we've shared a variety of strategies for note-taking, brainstorming and planning, and workflow and productivity. Overall, it's important to remember that there is no single best strategy, and sometimes less is more. In the end, the best strategies are the ones that work for you.